We have with us today Father Alan. He's going to be speaking to us about his faith and also his time as a reverend in Bethnal Green, where he served his church community for over 24 years. He's going to share with us his experience in facing off the EDL, as well as also what his views are currently on what's happening in the Middle East. Hello, Father Alan. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you here. And we'd just like to start with you maybe giving us an introduction about yourself, your upbringing, and how you came to become interested in Christianity, or whether that was something you were born into in your family. It'd be great to hear.
I was born in Brighton in 1956, so I'm 68 years old now. My family weren't particularly Christian, but in a normal sort of British way, they went to church at Christmas and Easter and had me baptised as a Christian as a very small baby. They sent me to Sunday school when I was about 5, and they did that not out of a great Christian desire, but because I was real trouble, and they wanted a bit of rest from me on a Sunday morning. So they sent me to Sunday school so that they could have a quiet time. And I loved it. I particularly loved the Bible stories. I became a reader at quite an early age and loved stories. And those stories, both from the Old Testament about the prophets there and the New Testament about Jesus, they were great. They were from such a long time ago. There were battles in them, but also there was this claim that they were true, and I found that just very exciting. So I really got involved in the stories of the Bible. I got thrown out of Sunday school for naughtiness, I'm afraid to say.
Right.
But I moved on to becoming a choir boy in my local church, and that was in Brighton. And the church was set up in such a way that the choir was in a loft at the back, so we were in a gallery next to the organ, looking over the whole of the church, and I could see what was going on. And my end of the Christian church is more like a Roman Catholic church. So there's lots of drama going on. The priests dress up, there's candles, there's incense, there's lots of movement. And I liked all of that theatre. So that further interested me in the church. And there were a couple of times, because of the amount of incense that was being used, that some of the older congregation members collapsed. I remember really well, having been overcome by the fumes. And the priest never stopped. Everyone else was rushing around trying to get some water or call the ambulance, whatever's needed. And I distinctly remember that the priest just kept going with the service. And I can understand that that was important. He knew that other people were looking after that, but I was appalled by it.
Right.
And I thought, that's terrible. I could do better than this. So for some of my colleagues, their calling to ordained ministry was because they had a vision of Jesus. Yeah. And for me, it's because I thought I could do better than the priest, which is a bit sad. In my teenage, I didn't really believe very much of it, but I stayed. And in odd times, I thought, well, all this stuff about God and things is stupid. But somehow I stayed as a member of the church and was still very much thinking about the possibility of being ordained. And in the end, it was a really intellectual choice. I saw the church, particularly the Church of England, as supporting the establishment. It is the established church of the country, with bishops in the House of Lords. I could see that a lot of the time it was very conservative in its views, and I was becoming more left-wing at the time. But I also saw that at odd times the Church of England provided a very different voice, and it didn't fit into that establishment role. and spoke out and acted out in ways that were in line with what I understood the Bible was talking about. So I realized I had a choice of committing myself to an establishment organization or of being in that, but attempting to be still that radical voice within it. And that's what I sought to do throughout my ministry.
Okay, great. And can you just tell me a little bit about what does it mean to become ordained in Christianity or for you?
In the Church of England, we have quite a rigorous process. So as a member of a church, either I might go to my parish priest and say, do you know, I've been thinking I'd quite like to follow what you've been doing. Or it might be, and I think probably more often what happens is that the priest sees that there are these days men and women who show an understanding of the church and may have certain skills as well, and say, would you like to think about it? So then there is an informal process of working with your parish priest and just thinking, well, what about this then? And then it's taken up by the wider church, and there is probably a minimum of 2 years where you are working with others who are going through the same discernment process. And after that, if everyone still thinks, you and the others, that this is worth pursuing, then you go to a selection conference. And they make recommendations, and if you get through that, then you will do a period of training for maybe 2 or 3 years at a specialist college. And after that, you do a sort of apprenticeship. You are ordained then, but not able to do the full range of work a priest does. And you are attached to a church for 2 or 3 years where you learn on the job, as it were. And after 1 year, you will be ordained to priest so that you can do the full range of services and stay there with a mentoring vicar for another couple of years. Before then, either you might move on to your own church or go into a specialist role such as chaplaincy.
Okay, great. So, Father Alan, you are currently an Anglican chaplain at the University of Sussex. And before that, you were a reverend at the Church of St. John on Bethnal Green. Can you explain to me a little bit about the current role that you have and what your role previously has been? And I believe you've been in Bethnal Green for over 24 years, is that correct?
That's right.
Could you just share a little bit about your experiences in these two roles?
I came to Bethnal Green in 1998. I took over the church, which covers the area of half of Bethnal Green and Globetown. It had been previously 3 churches, 2 of those had closed, and they're now housing. So St. Peter's in Cephas Street and St. Bartholomew's behind Sainsbury's. So they had been 3 separate parishes, but they closed 2 of the churches and kept St. John's, this much larger church that could accommodate all the congregation. And I had a team of 2 or 3 other clergy who were based in those other areas of the parish, so that we could cover the whole area. The distinctive thing about the Church of England, more than anything about what we look like in services or how we dress, is that we are the established church of the land. And the bit that doesn't interest me much is that we have bishops in the House of Lords. What does interest me is that when I come to a parish, when I came to Bethnal Green, what I promise my bishop that I will do is look after everybody who lives in that parish. I'm not hired just to be a chaplain of the church community. That's part of my work, is to look after that congregation that comes, to look after the membership. But I am responsible for everybody who lives in the parish.
So irrespective of religion, faith, anything like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so some of my more hardline colleagues might interpret that to how are we going to make you a Christian if you're in my
Right, I
parish?
understand, yeah.
For me, it's about how do I make use of the resources that I have in order to serve the people who live here. And in Bethnal Green, in Tower Hamlets, that is about dealing with inequality. It's about dealing with hatred and abuse. It's about ensuring that everybody who lives in my parish can have fulfilled lives. And I can make use of my church in order to do that. So St John's is very large. So although it requires a lot of work to get it up to scratch in the modern age, it is really usable. So not only could we put on services for people who want to go to church, we could make use of the same space to put on concerts, to put on films, to have art exhibitions, so that the space was available to a much wider group of people.
Right.
And in our crypt, we could develop community spaces so that we have had English as a second language teaching. We've had a psychotherapist working down there. We've had alternative medical practice that have offered services to people at very reduced rates so that people who would not otherwise have access to those medical facilities could. And so in those ways, we can begin to really try to serve everyone who lives here. But then also, I have never spent the majority of my time in my church. I need the church as a base. I need my church services as a place to root my prayer and my understanding. But then my work is to go out from there. So for most of the 24 years, I was very involved in the local community, particularly in the areas of responding to hate crime and in building an interfaith understanding within the borough.
So my next question is around the award that you received round about this time last year, the Anne-Marie Schimmel Award for championing a Muslim cause. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that work that you did and the reasons for you receiving that award?
Yes, I was very privileged and surprised to receive that. It was really as a consequence of me being a parish priest in Tower Hamlets and doing what I consider to be that ministry that I've described to you about serving the people who live here, regardless of whether they're a member of my church or not. And so I began working on race and hate crime issues in about 2002. And by 2010, that had become the No Place for Hate Forum in Tower Hamlets, of which I was then chair, and worked to bring both statutory and voluntary groups together to respond to the issues that we face here. And in Tower Hamlets, some of the time, that was really successful. It was dependent upon confidence upon all of those who were taking part. And there were times at which, in particular, either the borough or the police lost that confidence and withdrew a bit. And then working together on those issues became quite difficult. But when there was that confidence, when we could listen to one another, it was possible to work with all of the different communities that have different views about whatever the events might be that are happening, to recognise that those different views exist, but to find a way that Tower Hamlets is going to respond to emergency situations, to difficult times, that will ensure the best for the whole community. And that balance is a really difficult one, and I think we were very good at doing that.
Yeah.
And that meant, in particular, through a period from about 2011 to about 2016, it was a bit quieter after that, but may well happen again, when the extreme right particularly were very focused upon this borough. and the need to ensure that there was a coordinated local response.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Ignore that.
That's all right.
Start again.
So, in that period between about 2010, 2011 and 2016, there was a coordinated, there was a real attempt by the extreme right in particular to really show that Tower Hamlets was an awful place, to show that there were too many mosques here, to show that our young people were violent, and they wanted to really disrupt life here.
Yeah.
And it was of crucial importance that the response to that was a united community response on our streets, to show that they were not welcome here.
Yeah.
It was fine that we were asking that their right-wing marches should be banned, but they needed to be defeated on the streets. They needed to be faced by a united community. And we were able to do that. And the times that both the English Defence League and then Britain First and later the football lads tried to march here, and which we were saying, whose streets? Our streets. Whose mosques? Our mosques. And it was vital that we could show the message both to the right wing and to the world's media that the people who were defending the mosques in Tower Hamlets were not just angry young Bangladeshi men, but were people like me. There were distinctive religious people from other communities who were standing shoulder to shoulder with the young men here in Tower Hamlets. And I think that was very effective. It certainly made Britain First very angry when they turned up outside the East London Mosque with big white crosses to say that they wanted to make this borough Christian again. And they wanted to film young men getting angry and fighting them. And instead they had me and others saying, you're not welcome here. You're ruining my ministry by being here, and you have no place. They tried to out me as a paedophile on Facebook, and the bloke who did that, of course, not being a very clever member of Britain First, ended up in prison for it. But that sort of resistance from our side, as a wide community response, was absolutely vital.
Let me ask you this question, and then you can expand on it a bit further in terms of Muslim communities, let's say. So obviously we've seen this summer riots taking place, and protests, and in many cases the target of those riots and protests have been anti-immigration, and in some ways it'd probably be fair to say also anti-Muslim kind of immigration in particular. So can you tell me a little bit about your view on that is, and maybe about the Muslim communities that do exist? How do you feel that they should be responding to this situation?
I think it terribly sad what has happened this summer. It is in a way not surprising. I think language about immigrants and asylum seekers and the Muslim community has been getting worse over the last couple of years. We've had that period before with the English Defence League and others who were marching, but I think that language has increasingly slipped into the mainstream. We dealt with those groups here in Tower Hamlets at that time, but I think throughout our culture, we have not dealt with those issues, and over the last 2 or 3 years it has become more acceptable to intimate particularly the issues about the Muslim community, that they are dangerous in one way or another, that they won't join the rest of the community, that they won't integrate, and this comes from leading politicians. And I think that has made the aggression then more acceptable. And it is then picked up by people who may at other times not share those views at all, but are feeling marginalised within this country, are feeling that they are losing money, that they're losing positions, that they have no place, and so particularly immigrants and asylum seekers become the target for their fears and their concerns about what is happening to their lives, and Islam just dragged into that as well, about an enemy within. That sort of language can rise very easily. So I think it is important that we are very firm in dealing with people who riot. I don't think they should be called terrorists, but then I don't think that Muslims in this country who express other views about living here should also be called terrorists. I think terrorism is far more extreme term than for either of those groups. But what we have to do is try to overcome that ignorance, try to overcome those simple, stupid connections that people make, and try to find ways to work together to identify the real causes of our problems that all of us have to deal with. It is always the case that in this country we do say that we get on well with one another. Oh, when the chips are down, and we can have many examples of that. But it is easy to undermine that, as it is in other places. And I've been to Bosnia-Herzegovina, and I've seen what happens when a group, the Serb leadership, decided to show that you cannot live well together. And the community, by and large, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, of Christian and Muslim faiths and of different traditional ethnicities, did live well together. Yeah. But they started a process to try to destroy that, and they were very successful in doing so, and it resulted in Srebrenica. That's the danger. We're not at that point here, but I think we have to keep that in mind, because we can lose that wonderful openness to one another without even noticing that it's happened if we're not paying attention.
Yeah, well, God forbid that that kind of enmity and hatred within our communities was ever to arise to that level in the UK. And I know that, and you've probably seen as well, I think members of the Muslim community, imams, have also try to respond to these riots and protests in the positive way that they feel that they can, i.e. by actually inviting people who maybe have a question or query or whatever the problem is that people perceive to be with Muslims or Islam, to come to the mosque, come and visit, come and speak to them, come and speak to members of the Muslim community, and hopefully to kind of recognize, like you say, actually our communities as people, as human beings, we're not different. We all have the same needs, the same wants, the same aspirations for our children, for our families, for ourselves. And actually, a lot of the time, the stresses and the pain that we feel are not as a result of the other community, but for other external reasons. Okay, so Father Alan, beyond the UK, we know that the Holy Lands, Jerusalem, Palestine, are very much in the news and at the forefront of events taking place in the Middle East. I think it's a tragic situation, really, in terms of the conflict and the killing that is going on, especially the suffering of the innocent people, whichever kind of denomination or faith that they may be from. Now, it'd be interesting to hear from you a little bit about Christians in the Holy Land, and maybe as a introduction, really, I know that when Muslims came and you could say, conquered Jerusalem under the Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the keys to it were actually given into the hands of Umar ibn al-Khattab, the Caliph at that time, for really safekeeping and in some ways as a custodian of ensuring the safety of Christians in Jerusalem. So it'd be great to hear if you have any views in regards to how Christians are living in the Holy Lands at present, or any other comments in this regard.
I don't know too much about the Holy Land. My perspective has always been, I've never been there, I should say. A lot of my friends and colleagues think it's really important to visit the Holy Land.
Would you like to go?
No.
No?
Not really.
Okay.
I've always rooted everything about my faith here. I don't need to go and see the places where we think Jesus might have been. I see Jesus here. I work with all of those issues that dominated his ministry here. We put up a traditional series of artwork in St John on Bethnal Green depicting Jesus's route on the last day, on Good Friday, that over the centuries began people going to the Holy Land and doing that pilgrimage. These are the places that he walked as he went to his death on the cross. And the tradition built up of having those paintings as stations of a pilgrimage in New Elm Church. We did those. And we did them in a very distinctive order, so that the last one of Jesus dying, being placed in the tomb, is by the main door of the church. Traditionally, they end by the altar at the other end of the church, because the theology is that if you want to see the risen Christ, you come here on Sunday when we have the Holy Communion and Jesus is present with us. We did it differently and put that last station, that last painting, by the door of the church, because we were saying, if you want to meet the risen Jesus, you have to go out into Bethnal Green. This is where Jesus is for us. This is where that service and that discipleship happens here. So I don't know all that much about that. What I will say is what really appalls me is that understanding within some parts of Judaism that they were given this land by God and it's theirs. Personally, I think that's a misreading of Scripture. I think what they were doing was liberating that land. The experience of escaped slaves from Egypt took that experience into the city-states of what became Israel, and those who were unhappy with the way that they were living under oppression joined with those slaves and began a new life. That what is crucial in that is not ownership of the land, but the liberation, that experience of the escaped slaves. And that has to be awakened in each age, because we can all become oppressors. We can all become the Pharaoh who creates those slaves. And it is absolutely wrong interpretation of Jewish and Christian faith for a settler to go out with a gun and shoot people because it's their land. It has to be shared. And it has to be shared by all those who live there in peace, recognising that means giving up some of the values that they believe in, and that's very difficult, and I don't know how that's going to be achieved. The Christians, but what I do know about the Christians is majority of them are Palestinians and have had a very difficult time for quite a long time, and so this is just an added burden now upon that. But yes, there are those good stories, as you've just described, where there has been such a level of mutual respect that the communities can be guardians of one another.
Yeah.
So I really hope that that's what we can move to again.
Okay, my next question is maybe a bit of a theological question. It'd be great to hear your view in this regard. There are people who have difficulty in believing in God, or maybe they just can't conceive the idea that God exists. Sometimes we'll say, look, if there was a God who is kind, caring, loving, then why is there so much suffering in the world? How would you respond to that question?
I mean, I think first of all, I have no problem with people not believing in God. I think fundamentally, you make choices about how to interpret the world that we're part of. And there are many different ways of doing that. And for some people, that godlike imagery is really important way to understand a connection. For others, it just doesn't make any sense. I'm far more interested in people's actions, really, and whether they are supporting of humanity, whether they are overcoming barriers, and whether they are prepared to listen to one another's different interpretations of things, more than saying you should or should not believe in God. And those of us who do say we believe in God, we do so in different ways as well. The Islamic understanding of God has some overlap with my Christian understanding of God, but there are some different understandings. I find that quite interesting, more than I'm not threatened by it. We both think that we're exclusive. That's part of our history. I don't think that means I have to put my fingers in my ears when you talk about Allah. I think that this is part of what it is to be human and have different histories and different understandings. For me, God does not control everything. For me, at heart, what God means to me is that the universe is not a cold, empty, impersonal place. That there is meaning and love behind it. How we get on with our lives is up to us. Free will is an absolute constituent part of our lives. To think of this universe with a controlling mind behind it that is forcing us to behave in certain ways, it makes no sense to me. So that we're free to do as we like, and if we behave murderously, then I hope the law will come down upon us. But God is not going to stop us doing that. And the nature of the universe is that it's not all tea and cakes. It has to be a real environment in which the good and bad coexist. I think there is a value in having language about the devil. I don't believe in a devil with forked horns and a tail. But I think that there is a sense in which we can make more of evil than just saying you've made a bad decision. We can see that there is a force for good, and we can see that there is a force for evil. And we have to work to be part of a force for good and not part of a force for evil. I mean, I think in a very, very small way, we can see that in the rioting that has taken place, the way that you can get caught up in something that's far beyond your own decision making and be carried along by it. I think it's worth talking about that in terms of evil. So that suffering happens. How we respond to that suffering is what is important. My distinctive understanding of the Christian view is that Jesus is God, not just a prophet of God, but is God in the way that we as Christians understand God as Father, Son and Holy Spirit. One unity, but three persons in that unity. we could talk about that
We
for
could
several
talk
hours.
about that for a lot longer. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe on another
but
occasion.
Jesus is God here, incarnate as a human being amongst us, and has experienced the very worst that we can do to a human being. That is part now of the understanding of God, so that suffering is taken back at the end of Jesus' life at the Ascension into the Godhead, Father, Son and Holy Spirit. And so there is no gap between God and us in understanding what we go through. And so if I suffer, I can find comfort in knowing that God has experienced this as well. I mean, our history of the saints is continually, whatever it is that you as the Roman authorities or whatever empire or political power is going to throw at us, is always, we can make your life really awful. If you don't stop believing what you believe, we can torture you and we can kill you. And the Christian response to that is to say, well, Jesus went through all of this, I can too. And indeed, we then turn that threat of death and violence into a celebration, amazing turning on its head, so that very often the symbols of our saints are that which they were threatened with. So, for example, a simple one, there is a woman saint called Saint Apollonia, who was attacked by a group of pagans who knocked her teeth out. And she is now the patron saint of dentists.
Right.
So that it really is poking fun at those people who think that they can carry out threats of violence and death by putting the finger up and saying, nope, sorry, can't do that. We're
gonna turn that matter into a positive.
Yeah.
In terms of how humans can react to a situation of suffering, and
yes,
be resilient against it in some ways.
And there has been an unfortunate tendency within some bits of Christianity to somehow glorify that suffering itself. That's not the point. It's not saying I really need to start whipping myself because I should feel pain as a Christian. That's my discipleship. But it is that your threat of pain will have no effect on me.
Father Alan, you're a man of the cloth, as they say with that. You're a man of faith. You believe in God. You follow your Christian beliefs and practices, I'm sure, as best as you can. Similarly, many Muslims want to adhere to the Islamic teachings. They want to be able to follow the Sharia, which is like the Islamic law, as best as they can. And sometimes there can be this kind of a worry, or maybe a question that arises really is, what is best for people of faith to try and live as best as they can according to their faith and their teachings, while at the same time, how do they navigate some of the challenges that they might face in, let's say, a secular society, which on occasions can undermine their faith, their teachings, their personal beliefs. How do you view that challenge?
I think, first of all, fundamentally, I think secularism, as it is understood in the West, is a Christian creation. That the theology of St. Augustine, who is probably the greatest theologian of the Western Church, in the Kingdom of God, set out the distinctions of how Christianity should operate within a political system, and there was a real gap between the things that are given to God and the things that are given to Caesar, in phrase from Jesus in the Gospels, and Western political civilization, I think, is built from that work. So there is, we do have a history where things like the Holy Roman Empire and Charlemagne really attempted to create a religious state. But by and large, that separation has been much more the way that the church has understood how things should be.
Mm-hmm.
In this country, it is, as always, of course, it's a bit of one thing and a bit of another, that we are a secular state, but we do have an established faith. We do have the bishops in the House of Lords, and it has that positive side of the way that I've already set out my understanding of my ministry, so that I'm not just kept in my church. We don't just say faith is okay as long as you do it behind closed doors. And I think to some extent we were letting secularism take us over a bit too much from the Second World War onwards. And certainly within the church, I think we were beginning to think that we were okay as long as we stayed behind our doors and didn't upset people too much. And we would be made fun of in programmes on the telly of the Vicar of Dibley or the other ones that were there. We were figures of fun, but we were okay as long as we didn't go on about it too much. And I do think that Islam has helped us reclaim the public space. I think Islam is more obviously a faith that doesn't just happen in the mosque, but informs how you look and how you behave within public life, and that there has been less worry about communicating that you are a Muslim. And I think that's enabled us to find more confidence and to reclaim public space as well. So I do think that it is right that we live within a secular society, but it should be a secular society that recognises and values the place of faith within it. And that secularism from the end of the Second World War onwards, I think, has lost its way a bit, in that it's not understood that need for that openness and that diversity, and has sought to just marginalise us as if we were going to disappear off the face of the world, and it's quite obvious that's not the case. So I am concerned about a religious ignorance that's around. I think it's less with our young people, who generally have good opportunities within the school system to appreciate other faiths. But I think within the adult world, I think there are a lot of people in this country who have no understanding at all and don't know where to begin with people of faith, whether they're Christian or Muslim or whatever. And that ignorance turns into certainly a sense of being scared in the face of faith, but then can turn into the sort of hostility that we've seen in the riots as well.
Absolutely, thank you. And really, just to finish off, I would welcome any final words of wisdom that you would like to share with us.
I think it's really important that on the one hand we take our own faith seriously, that we respect other people's faiths, but I also think it's really important that we don't take ourselves too seriously. I perfectly understand this notion of being a part of a faith that is exclusive, that we do say this is the only way to do it. And I can hold that at the same time as recognising that you as a Muslim also believe that. And that, however impossible it is, where we live is right between that. It's not for us to work out what that means in the end of the day. Much more we take pleasure in one another's commitments.
Absolutely, yeah.
And recognise that where that leads us is to common activity and standing shoulder to shoulder in defending the faiths and defending our communities against those that want to pull us apart and destroy us. And the rest, in the end, we leave to God.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here with us today.
Thank you.
And listening to you. And hopefully maybe in the future we'll be able to do another one on some other pertinent and important issues. Thank you so much.
Very happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you.